Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site. It is Monday, August 29th, 2022. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let's talk about Anthony Joshua. I'm a bit surprised that so many people, including some of my longtime subscribers here on YouTube, are that impacted by Anthony Joshua's speech after his loss to Alexander Usyk. Right? I see it like Usyk sees it. Boxing's a passionate, emotional sport. A lot of these events are 1 or 2 time only events. Guys are emotional. They've trained a long time for the fight. They've thought about how the fight is going to go, and then maybe things work out, maybe things don't. Right? Maybe there were surprises. Maybe the fighter feels that he could have done more. Right? So over the years, I've heard some bizarre speeches at the end of fights. I want to encourage people to look at the speech that Dwyer gave at the end of his loss to George Foreman. Right? Guys grab the mic. Guys have a lot to say. Some will announce retirement. Some will challenge the rest of the division. Right? Whether it's victory or defeat. Some fighters at the end of passionate fights want you to know what they're thinking. Right? Chris Arreola used to use blue language at those moments. Right? It was a bit surprising that they allowed him to speak at the end of some big fights. Right? And he told you in colorful language where his head was. Let me just say this about Anthony Joshua. The takeaway I want you to have from this video is that Anthony Joshua has a lot of fights ahead of him if he wants them. He is, and he continues to be, one of the most mesmerizing figures in the sport. Right? Whatever you think of Anthony Joshua, he's a blessed puncher with power in both hands. He doesn't need a big wind-up. Right? Understand, he's a talent. Now, we can sit here and dissect anybody. Right? Old-timers will tell you that the great Ray Robinson, right, boxing royalty, never fought Charlie Burley. Right? If you go through boxing videos here on YouTube, you might even find an interview with Eddie Futch, Joe Frazier's former trainer. Right? Where Eddie praises Charlie Burley. Right? Old-timers will tell you that my favorite fighter in history, Jack Johnson, after he got the belt, really stayed away from African-American fighters. Right? I think he does fight an African-American while he's champion, but let's just say you would have thought, given the color line at the time, that Jack Johnson would have gone out of his way to fight a few guys who were so deserving of shots at the heavyweight title that they're in the Hall of Fame now. Right? The great Jack Dempsey had a black sparring partner. One of his main sparring partners was African American. But yet Jack Dempsey somehow never fought Harry Wills. I want people to look up these names. Right? Because history is written by the winners. Folks, there are a lot of champions who never got the opportunity. Championship level fighters. Right? Now, AJ, the critics of AJ, and I'll raise my hand. Right? I've been critical of AJ here online. The critics of AJ will point out that he's had perfect career timing. right? You had an unbeaten heavyweight champion who had just beaten Vladimir Klitschko. And of course, he falls apart, right? Tyson Fury doesn't make it to the rematch. Fury gains weight. Fury has issues, right? Substance abuse issues. There's even the cloud of whether or not performance-enhancing drugs were part of his regimen, right? Look it up. I'm not going to pull the punch here. So Fury's somewhat out of the ring. The UK is really a boxing mecca. I get the feeling there were a lot of people in the UK who felt that Fury let them down. Right? Let's just be real. Along comes Anthony Joshua. Right? Vladimir Klitschko out of the ring a year. Charles Martin somehow has a title. Right? In the annals of heavyweight boxing, can we agree that Charles Martin was one of the most unproven champions in the history of the heavyweight division? That's who Anthony Joshua beats to become champion. Vladimir Klitschko out of the ring a year, coming off a loss. That's Joshua's big coming out fight, even more so than the Charles Martin fight. And in that fight, after Joshua drops Klitschko, Klitschko gets off the canvas to drop Joshua. And in very curious footage, Klitschko, who was a closer, lets Joshua back into the fight. Right? You got the feeling that the Klitschko corner, which included his brother, didn't think Joshua could come back in that fight. Right? You got the feeling that Klitschko, who had sparred previously with Joshua, thought the fight was over. Did not feel that he was fighting a Joe Louis, a Lennox Lewis, a Joe Frazier. Right? Because against those guys, you understood that the guy could come back in the fight. So then you get to the meat of Anthony Joshua's career, and let me just say, let's talk about some of the biggest heavyweights in British boxing during the Anthony Joshua era. I'll even leave 5-year heavyweight champion, American, Deontay Wilder out of the conversation. Let's just focus on the best heavyweights in British boxing over the last few years. Look up Dillian Whyte's record. You're going to find out that he was suspended for a period of time. Whyte comes back from suspension. Let's just say that Dillian Whyte wasn't prime Dillian Whyte when he fought Anthony Joshua. Dillian Whyte himself will say that he suffered a shoulder injury during the fight. Right? But understand, Whyte hadn't been back from suspension that long. Let's talk about some of the other big names. Tyson Fury. Right? Joshua doesn't fight him. I understand there's a lot of people Joshua did fight. I don't mean to overlook Alexander Povetkin. I don't mean to overlook Joseph Parker. Now, Parker's rare here. Because Parker is a guy in his prime, right? So he's different than Alexander Povetkin. Right? Parker's in his prime. Parker had a title. Joshua fought him. Right? I congratulate Joshua on that win. Right? Dominique Brazil, He was a highly thought of American, right? But there again, the odds makers saw the fight as a mismatch. Brazil was not expected to make it to the middle rounds. Look at the over-under on that fight. Kubrat Pulev, older than Joshua, right? I personally consider the win over Pulev to be a major win, but many of the public don't, because Pulev wasn't known as a knockout puncher. So Joshua did fight some guys. I don't mean to overlook who Joshua fought, but what I want people to contemplate is the idea that Joshua is a British fighter. During his era, Joshua doesn't fight Fury. Joshua, an Olympic gold medalist, doesn't fight the silver medalist, who's from the UK, from the subsequent Olympics, Joe Joyce. Joshua does not fight Daniel Dubois. Folks, let me just say there's a whole group of people in boxing history who try to fight young lions before they grow up. Right? Think of Mike McCallum against Julian Jackson. Right? You want to spot the Daniel Dubois or the Joe Joyce before the guy becomes a threat to you. Right? You had Tyson Fury coming back. You had some people, I'll raise my hand, calling him the lineal. Right? Life is challenging. People are gonna, deal with demons. Tyson Fury was trying to come back. Right? And surprisingly, Anthony Joshua didn't pivot and say, hey, Tyson, you're unbeaten. I'll fight you here. Instead, Deontay Wilder stepped up. Understand what happened. Wilder, who's not even British, meets up with Fury. Folks, that's the defining series of fights in the heavyweight division from this era. Right? That series of fights. There were people saying, hey, Deontay Wilder, 5-year heavyweight champion, WBC, right, was not a Hall of Famer. I heard that here online. The argument was that he hadn't fought anyone. Right, folks? Just realize that he fought Fury 3 times now. That narrative is gone. He knocks down Fury multiple times in multiple fights. Right? The first fight, that's as close as it gets. Right? Fury beats the count. Can we agree that Jack Reese, the referee, reaches the count of 9 in that fight? What I want people to do is to go back and look at the Rumble in the Jungle. If you had that referee, right? Foreman's not down for 10 seconds, folks. He's down for 9 seconds. Look at the count in the Rumble in the Jungle. Right? Had Fury had that referee, he would have lost to Deontay Wilder. That first fight is decided by 1 second. Jack Reese does a full count. Fury, by his own admission, when he hits the canvas, and we're talking about the second knockdown of their first fight, is out cold. Fury has admitted in an interview that he comes to during the count. How many fights have everyone watched here where a guy hits the canvas and looks bad, Fury looked bad hitting the canvas, and the ref just waves it off? We get to the third fight, right? Just understand, The second time Fury goes down, in that third fight, he's badly hurt. Badly hurt. Now, unless somebody else comes along who can drop Tyson Fury multiple times in multiple fights, that's going to be a huge feather. Huge feather. Legacy-making feather in Deontay Wilder's hat. Right? Let me tell you how life works. Ali and Frazier really, they were friends. Then, of course, Ali goes the route where he's mocking Frazier, goes as far as to call Frazier a gorilla in Manila, right? In the 70s, it was not even something you thought was possible that Ali and Frazier could be making appearances together, actually being pals. But over time, because their series of fights were so defining, legacy making, people started talking about Ali Frazier. When you saw Ali, you thought of Joe Frazier. When you saw Joe Frazier, you thought of Ali. That's the way Fury Wilder are going to be in 20 years. Right? Anthony Joshua should have fought Tyson Fury. Anthony Joshua should have fought Joe Joyce. Right? Hey, we're British Olympians. Right? Especially given the fact that I feel Joe Joyce should have been awarded the gold medal in his Olympics. Anthony Joshua should have fought Daniel Dubois. Right? Old lions with belts should be on the lookout for young upstarts. And then say, hey, I've got to nip this in the bud. I can't have this guy grow up on me, then become Godzilla. Anthony Joshua somehow, and I believe this is really attributed to the people around him. Right? They know he's learning on the job. But somehow, he not only doesn't fight Wilder, and we can blame whoever we want. I understand there's a crowd out there that wants to make the claim that Wilder somehow is avoiding Anthony Joshua. Right? Okay, fine. I'm just telling you that there are guys in history who made fights happen. Right? Ali comes back from boxing Siberia. Right? They strip his boxing license and stuff like that. Ali does beat Jerry Quarry, underrated fighter. Right? Jerry Quarry, for those who don't know, once stopped Ernie Shavers. Right? The Jerry Quarry-Joe Frazier fight is one of the gold standards in the sport's history. I would encourage people to look up that fight. Right? Ali beats Jerry Quarry. But understand, other than that, right, Ali really didn't do much before the first Joe Frazier fight in terms of his comeback. But Joe Frazier understood, I need to fight Ali. Right? An unbeaten champion, right? Ali's an earlier generation's Tyson Fury. An unbeaten champion who, the sport moves on from because the guy has his license revoked. That's a guy you have to fight. How did Anthony Joshua get to his 30s without fighting Wilder, Fury, Joe Joyce, Daniel Dubois? Right, folks? It's astonishing. So now Joshua's in a place where people are openly doubting him. Right? Folks are saying, hey, look, this guy didn't fight some major people. He wins his title from Charles Martin. Right? Vladimir Klitschko was coming off a loss. right? Joshua was the guy fighting at home. Joseph Parker travels to him. Right? The KO streak ends with Joseph Parker. Right? Dillian White is straight off a suspension, fights a few fights, suddenly he's in with Anthony Joshua. And so you do have critics of Anthony Joshua. Now, Joshua did something that's been underreported, that we need to look at, that has boxing history going on. Understand that Ray Leonard used to wear tassels, right? Different era, right? Ray would come in. I know young people don't understand it, but Ray had an afro and, Ray would pat the afro, Ray had flavor and stuff like that. Well, it was Flavorful Ray that was in against Roberto Duran. Understand, folks, Duran was really a lightweight who was moving up in weight. And in a great fight, Duran beats him. Right? Pretty boy Ray gets roughed up in the fight. So for the rematch, Ray Leonard, who, was one of these entourage type guys, was one of these flashy showman type guys. Right? Ray comes in wearing black. Right? This would be like looking at Adrian Broner and suddenly Broner comes in, different persona, serious. Right? Comes in wearing black. Anthony Joshua loses to Usyk, comes in for the rematch wearing black. You can tell, new trainer. By the way, Ray was not going to get rid of Angelo Dundee. We knew that, right? No new trainer for Ray Leonard. New trainer for Joshua. Joshua was seeking a rebirth, wasn't he? Right? He loses the fight. It's a tough loss. His best round is round 9. They come out for round 10, and Alexander Usyk shows you why he's the heavyweight champ. Usyk is cuffing him around in round 10. Usyk then goes on to finish strong. Round 11, round 12. I have no idea what fight the judge who gave the fight to Anthony Joshua was watching. Those last 3 rounds, in my opinion, are definitive. Right? Usyk found himself where he didn't want to be in round 9. Decides to make a statement in round 10 and does. So what I want Joshua to do, and we all have ideas, right? I'm just a fan. I'm just a fan here on YouTube of boxing, right? But understand, Joshua really has a major opportunity. We all know who he is. Of all the heavyweights, I would say this is the guy with the golden touch at the box office. He's compelling. In some ways, he's like Princess Diana, in that, the guy, you're just riveted by him. Right? Whatever else is going on in the background, what this guy does catches your attention. So he's in a position here where there are a lot of people he hasn't fought yet. And what I want him to do is to continue to look at Ray Leonard. Right? Understand, Ray detaches his retina. Ray doesn't fight as often in the 1980s, the first 7 years of the 1980s, as you think. So when Ray comes back, multi-year absence, who does he fight? He fights the one guy who's been stalking him for years, who's been giving interviews talking about how he wants to fight Ray, who actually shows up when Ray gives a speech. The press thought Ray was going to say, "Hey, I'm coming back to the sport." Marvin Hagler was in the crowd. Right? Being a dominant middleweight champion wasn't enough for Marvin Hagler. Hagler understood he was not loved like Ray Leonard was loved. Right? Hagler beating people like Thomas Hearns, Roberto Duran, that wasn't enough. He wanted Ray Leonard, right? This is the Jordan, Kobe, LeBron side of the sport, right? Tom Brady side of the sport. Hagler was unsatisfied. He wanted Ray Leonard. Ray fought him. Right? I'm just telling you right now, Deontay Wilder wants Anthony Joshua. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure if Usyk beats Fury, Deontay Wilder is going to want Usyk. Right? Go after the guy with the belt. But if Wilder can't get Usyk, because there are others in line, right? The winner of Ruiz, Ortiz, Filip Ergovic, who just beat Zhang in an elimination fight. Right? But make no mistake, Joshua and Wilder have unfinished business. Make no mistake, there are a lot of people who still want to see Fury against Joshua. Make no mistake, you go to Olympic silver medalist Joe Joyce and say, hey, do you want to fight Anthony Joshua? You know what the response will be. Make no mistake, if Daniel Dubois wants to rise in British boxing, isn't Anthony Joshua the challenge you want? Let's go one step further. I'm sure Dillian Whyte thinks back to his fight against Anthony Joshua and thinks, man, I actually had my moments that first round. I could have pumped the jab on this guy. Right? Understand, the body snatcher is elite in the pocket. I would argue that he's a better boxer than Anthony Joshua. Joshua's the better puncher. But Dillian Whyte's probably the better boxer. You don't think that Joseph Parker doesn't think about what could have happened if he didn't have one of the worst refereeing performances in recent memory in a heavyweight title fight, hindering him from coming inside on Anthony Joshua. So let's get back to Ray Leonard. Right? Folks, after Ray fights Marvin Hagler, I want you to think about Ray Leonard's biggest nemesis. Right? Prime Ray Leonard, one of the best fights I've seen, was the Ray Leonard-Thomas the Hitman Hearns fight. Folks, he fights Hearns a second time. He fights Duran a third time. Ray Leonard goes up to light heavyweight. You need to remember this fight because Ray gets cuffed around. He has to get off the canvas to beat Donnie Lalonde. What I want people to do is to look at the stoppage in that fight. That's vintage Ray Leonard. And this is Ray who had been out of the ring for years. In other words, the Ray Leonard comeback was against great fighter, great fighter, great fighter. Folks, he fights Terry Norris. Ray Leonard was no longer Ray Leonard. Understand, Norris is in the Hall of Fame. He closes against Hector Camacho. Right, folks? Even Ray Leonard's critics will concede that Ray Leonard was a competitor. Right? Hagler, Hearns, Duran, Lalonde, Norris, Camacho. That's just the Ray Leonard comeback. Now, Anthony Joshua could literally line them up. He threw the belts down in his speech. Folks, he's that rare fighter who doesn't need a belt. Right? Don't get me wrong. If Fury beats Usyk, in my opinion, the fighter he has to fight for the United Kingdom, for himself, just to let us know who would be the top, would be Anthony Joshua. Right? Think about it. Fury, Wilder. Folks, they both would want to fight Anthony Joshua. So Joshua has a great trainer with him now. Robert Garcia. Right? Understand a Robert Garcia fighter. I bet against Bam Rodriguez. Made a video here online. I took Rungasai, his opponent, who I thought just had too much experience. Right? Bam Rodriguez is one of these young guys who you look at him and you say, wow, does the guy know what he doesn't know? Right? Everyone's a phenom until they start fighting world-class fighters. Then things get complicated. Well, understand, Bam Rodriguez is winning the fight. He's too fast for Rungasai, who's hanging around because Rungasai's a cagey vet. That's what cagey vets do. Right? He's hanging around, waiting for an opening. And of course, Rodriguez just could not turn off the gas. Gets the stoppage. Right? That's a, should I say, prototypical Robert Garcia fighter. Right? Garcia has a lot of Emmanuel Stewart in him. Let me just say, if I'm Anthony Joshua, right, if I'm concerned about health, physical and mental, if I look at myself giving my post-fight speech and I'm thinking, man, I don't even remember all of that. Okay. No shame in walking away from the sport with financial security. But if he's a Ray Leonard type guy, right, Ray Leonard, the cheering was nice. He was a fan favorite. This is boxing royalty. He was one of the most popular fighters in the sport. Right? He once did a pickup truck commercial with Larry Holmes. Right? That's how big he was. The heavyweight champ and Ray Leonard. Right? Detached retina could not keep Ray out of the sport. When he came back, he had to fight the dominant middleweight champion of several years. Then he had to pivot. He had to fight the Hitman, who on the scorecards was beating him in the 14th round when Ray got that stoppage. He had to fight Durant, who had beaten him. Think about the Hall of Famers, right? Hagler, Hearns, Durant, on Ray's return card. Anthony Joshua could literally make the case still that he's the heavyweight of this era if he lines them up and mows them down. Right? Think about it. Right? Joshua's going to come back this year. You already saw him working on some things. Bent knee, going to the body. He's fighting lower. He's on his front foot in that 10th round. Right? Garcia has already told the press he wants Joshua on his front foot before the 10th round. Right? Joshua could answer a lot of questions. If he fights and beats Deontay Wilder, how could the Wilder people question him? If he fights and beats Tyson Fury, how could the Fury people question him? Any lingering doubts about the Parker fight? Any lingering doubts about the White fight? Joshua could address both of those fights, couldn't he? Right, Joe Joyce? Who's the prime heavyweight Olympian from the UK over the last 12 years? Joshua could answer that question. Daniel Dubois, explosive, has only lost to Joe Joyce. In a Dubois fight, heavy punches are going to be thrown. If Dubois announced that his next opponent was Anthony Joshua, how many people show up for that fight? Folks, if you're serious about this, you need to start with the number 20,000. Minimum. Right? So let's just say, I know Joshua said some things after the fight. I understand. Right? Let's also point out, too, that Joshua could fight Andy Ruiz again. Let's remember, that's 1-1. Right? That's 1-1. I know Joshua won his title back. No one's up in that series. So let's just say Joshua right now has the capability to go on the run that Ray Leonard did when he came back. Right? Ray Leonard, tough moments, right? Did he really beat Marvin Hagler? If you look at that fight and count the body shots, you might feel Ray got a gift in that fight. But in the 1980s, let me tell you how it played out. Right? Ray's awarded the decision. The next 24 hours, I spoke with a lot of boxing fans, friends of mine, and we were all amazed. Right? There was controversy. Some people said, did Ray really win that fight? We had a deeper question. How was Ray able to go the distance that fight? We were shocked. Right? I thought Ray, I'll just be upfront here, I thought Ray lost the Thomas Hearns fight. Tommy drops him twice. Somehow Ray goes the distance in that fight. Ray had his moments too, but let's just say Tommy should have had 2 10-8 rounds in that fight. But still, even there, you thought, wow, Ray is fighting Tommy again? Tommy was the more active fighter in the late 80s. Right? The Duran fight, Ray just had better legs than Roberto. I want people to realize that Roberto, who's past his prime by then, but understand, Roberto late in his career was beating guys like Rand Barkley. Right now, the Donnie Lalonde fight, let's just say, the fact that Ray is hurt, the fact that Ray has to come back, and the fact that he does so with devastating combinations, really makes that fight one of the better fights to watch. Now, Ray stuck around too long. By the time you get to Terrible Terry Norris, we forget, folks, Terrible Terry, who had beaten Meldrick Taylor, was a hell of a fighter, right? The only question was whether Ray could land a home run shot on Terry Norris, who had lost, I believe, to John the Beast Mugabe, right? Ray wasn't able to land that shot. Terrible Terry beat him badly, in my opinion. Right? And all I can say about Hector Camacho, and I want people to remember him the right way. Right, folks? Camacho had blinding hand speed until his last fight. Right? This was a fighter who you got the feeling, if he just trained more, if he just focused on boxing a little bit more, right? Camacho was a fighter who liked to hit clubs and get out and stuff like that. Who knows what would have happened with Camacho? Right? Camacho to this day is one of the most talented fighters I've ever seen. That Bazooka Limon fight is a hand speed show. Anthony Joshua has the same opportunity Ray Leonard had. Understand, Ray Leonard had critics in the 1980s. Right? He had critics. Right? People viewed him as a pretty boy, even though the guy had a KO percentage over 60%. Anthony Joshua has critics. He can do a lot. There are a lot of big fights here that he can do to answer those critics, myself included. So I hope Anthony Joshua stays in the sport for purely selfish reasons. I like talented fighters. I like compelling storylines. Joshua has a group that includes Fury, Wilder, Joyce, Dubois, Dillian White, Joseph Parker, Andy Ruiz, who want a second shot on him. Some of them want a first shot on him. Right, folks? He is the cash cow in the heavyweight division even now. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.